seen plenty of coverage of former President Donald Trump's announcement that he's running again. But after the wall-to-wall madness we saw in 2016, this time it's different. The usual suspects that you'd expect might have aired the whole thing, just didn't. Even Fox broke away before he was done, and MSNBC didn't air it at all. The big three networks opted not to break out of their regular scheduled programming either, because Bachelor in Paradise had to go on. And the headlines we've seen since are definitely not your run-of-the-mill presidential announcement coverage. Perhaps because a man who encouraged the overthrowing of the U.S. government is not a run-of-the-mill candidate. So, is the media handling this in the right way so far? And how should they, or we, do so proceeding forward? Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by Tom Fiedler, former dean of Boston University's College of Communications, and Lylah Alphonse, editor with the Boston Globe. Welcome to both of you. Before we get started, I want to throw to some sound and some images we have from Liz Harrington, the spokesperson for Trump. She was speaking to the right-wing media channel Real America's Voice on Tuesday, just before Trump's announcement. Let's take a look.
They don't want the American people to hear directly from, the biggest leader of the greatest political movement in our history. So I do suspect they'll try to, censor and cut away. However, the people are anxious to hear from him, so they will go right around the major networks if they do indeed cut away. That's what you have to do now. I mean, we do not have the First Amendment. It's under attack.
So, Tom, what's your reaction to that? I mean, there is, on one hand, it does hand the Trump campaign a playbook on what to say about it not getting aired. But do you think the networks made the right decision? And is that the reaction we're going to see from the Trump campaign moving forward?
Well, I think they made the right decision, but I also don't think it was a hard decision for them to make. I mean, you're right to schedule something like that, a political announcement at prime time. As you say, you're going to have to knock a lot of very highly watched and well-funded shows off of the air. So that, TV is about making money. So that was, I think, a fairly easy decision. But Harrington's statement there about somehow this was a First Amendment issue, it's laughable on the one hand. The other side of it, though, is that this is once again an effort to portray Trump as being the victim of the media, that this plays right into that whole narrative that he's used so effectively, that the media is the enemy. And when there's an enemy out there, that makes his forces gather up and rise to his defense. So I think that's really what we saw with her comment. But as far as the media's position, again, I don't think that was a tough call for them at all.
Lylah, I've been referring to covering Trump's campaigns, the first campaign, the first go-round, not the first one, but the one where he won, as kind of a home improvement, do-it-yourself project. Like, after you do and lay a kitchen floor, you know how to do it, but you may never want to do it again, and you realize all the mistakes that you made in your do-it-yourself. And I think the media, myself included, was a bit shocked that Trump just kept doing these things that were not traditional and crazy and out of the box, and should we cover the tweets? But he's actually making public policy with the tweets. What do you think we should be thinking as members of the media as Trump launches this campaign? What should we have in the front of our minds when we're thinking about if something is newsworthy or not?
I think it's important to remember that a former president, no matter how outrageous, when he takes to the podium, you still have to at least consider coverage. That said, that doesn't mean you have to do stenography. You don't have to broadcast every little minute. You don't have to write down every single thing. You don't have to relitigate every argument he brings up. It's, I think, worth remembering that the First Amendment protects the press and protects people and freedom of speech from prosecution by the government. So networks choosing not to air his speech is not an attack on the First Amendment. I think it's also important to remember that he's not a traditional candidate. I have to agree with Governor Baker. It's a little unfair to have people think about 2024 right after we took a breath after 2022. And there is some election fatigue, and I think a lot of voters are feeling that, and that could also contribute to the decision to keep Bachelor in Paradise on the air instead of Donald Trump. But I think it's important to remember that as members of the press, we have a responsibility to put things in context and to offer information, not just confirmation. So in this case, I think NPR did it exactly right when they, in their lead of the coverage of his speech, when they pointed out that he helped inspire what many people think of as an insurrection, that he makes a lot of claims that are not true, and he knows they're not true, which is why it's fair to call them lies. I think it's important to offer that context. I think it's irresponsible to cover what he's saying and doing now without that context.
Tom, Lylah actually offered my next question was going to be to you is how much of a requirement is on us to make sure we point those things out each and every time that we, not all of them certainly, because that would be an entire Atlantic essay if we did, but there are a lot of things that we have to cover and point out when we talk about Donald Trump. Is that necessary? Should we continue to do it? Or is there a point, do we think, that the public will just get that he is who he is and these accusations and at some point maybe these convictions will be there?
Well, I think there is an obligation to do it. The difficulty is, and I think it primarily lies with live television, and Trump is the master of that. For those of us who were in the print press, and a little bit more, I think, with NPR and others, there you can use the medium there to step back and to in effect fact check as you go along. You can't do that on live television. Trump knows it. I think that's why Trump scheduled his kickoff at 9 p.m. With a fairly tight window. But I agree, Lylah. I think what we've got to do is we've got to be prepared to cover him. We can't ignore him. We would do that at our peril because he has a following. But, I always go back to somebody that we all know well, Marty Barron, when he was asked about the Trump tactic of making the press the enemy, and he was asked, are you, as then the Washington Post, going to war? And his answer was, no, we're going to work. And that's what I think the media has to do. We have to look at this campaign. We cover it as it's developed. We put the news forward, and maybe that means television will only go live when the substance may merit that. And, Trump can only go on with his relitigating the 2020 election. Well, he can't go on with it anymore. It's old news, and we cannot provide and won't, I believe, provide a platform for him to do that. But if he has a new policy proposal, just as any candidate might, it's worth the media looking at it, vetting it, criticizing it if necessary, and putting it out. That's going to work. So, but we don't want to let Trump just let his drama continue to run at the media's expense.
You mentioned Marty Barron, of course, formerly of the Washington Post, and before that, the Boston Globe. Lylah, I want to talk to you about how the public expectation has changed, I think, a little bit, and see if you agree with me on covering folks and covering elected officials. Former Vice President Mike Pence is on a tour right now, an interview tour. He's got a book out. Many people I'm seeing on what's left of Twitter, at least, and in other areas, are concerned that journalists are not being hard enough with Mike Pence and holding his feet to the fire regarding some things he's saying, especially like he doesn't feel compelled to testify in front of the January 6th committee if need be. Do you think that there's a greater appetite in general from the public asking journalists to be a little bit more strict and hold folks to a higher standard when they're interviewing them?
I think there is an expectation of that among certain segments of the readership or viewership. I think overall, a lot of people are looking to the media just to find out the basics, just to find out kind of the top level of what's going on. I think there's also a fair number of people who are hoping when there's coverage of someone like the former vice president that there's a little bit of accountability that we try to impose. And I think that there's some disappointment when they feel that the media doesn't go far enough in either being punitive or in holding someone accountable. Mike Pence may be laying the groundwork to run for office. He's not the vice president now. He's not running for office right now. That changes a little bit of the newsworthiness there of what he's saying. I mean, we know he's going on an interview tour to distance himself from any absolute craziness that comes out of Trump's newest campaign. And we know that Trump's newest campaign is only a little bit about running for office and a lot bit about avoiding punishment and accountability for all the things people are examining right now. So I think that people want to know what's new. I think that Trump is no longer new in a lot of ways. 6 years ago, journalists reacted, yes, as you said before, that this is not a traditional candidate. We don't quite know how to handle it. We kind of know how to handle him now a bit better. And also what he's saying is just a rerun. Even in his campaign announcement, the promises he started making were ones he made during his first campaign that he didn't fulfill during 4 years in office. The term limits, for example. So people, I think, are a little tired of hearing the same things over and over. So it's incumbent upon journalists to really kind of screen out some of that, be very, very discerning, pick out the stuff that's new and present it in context.
Tom,
but I think accountability is important.
Tom, to Lylah's point, too, I mean, we're all old enough to remember when Barack Obama, the candidate, was using email, how exciting that was, that there was this new technology that he was reaching actual voters and telling them to get out and vote. And now here we are with TikTok and with a number of other emerging social media platforms that didn't really have the same sway that they did if they existed during the last presidential campaign. What should we, as journalists, be focused on about what we cover in those realms? You know, if there's any candidate, not just Trump, with some TikTok sensation going on, what's an approach that you would tell your students to take when looking at it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is I would warn them against going after the bright, shiny object. And that's what Trump is so good at doing, whether he does it on TikTok or whether he does it now on Truth Social, whether he ever gets back onto Twitter, who knows? But, you know, don't go for that. Always think about, does this merit coverage? The one thing I do think, one lesson I do hope we took away from 2016 was in the candidate debates in the primaries, the decision about how to place the candidates on the platforms where they were was based on polling, which was name recognition. And in every one of the Republican debates leading up to the Iowa, New Hampshire on forward, Trump always had center stage because the idea was whoever polled the most would be in the middle. The result was that those poor candidates, and there were, you know, the baker's dozen of them, who never got the chance to challenge him, were sort of off on the fringes. I hope that the major networks don't make that mistake again, is just to sort of place, there ought to be something, a lottery or some other way to decide who has center stage in the most things. So to Lylah's point, we have learned a great deal since 2016 as to how to handle this, and hopefully the voters will be a little bit more mature also, and they'll avoid that bright, shiny object.
Lylah, I've been joking with some of my younger colleagues that the presidential campaign immediately starts as soon as the midterms are over. At least in our world, I didn't really expect that was going to happen. I thought I was just exaggerating to tell a story. Is this now, Trump has changed this, right? So now it's campaign season. Most people can't even wrap their minds around it. I remember, you know, at least going into the spring of what would be next year before folks actually start raising money or making committees together. Is this another thing that Trump has changed now, that this is going to be common? Just asking for a prediction from you that midterms are over and then the presidential season begins.
I think that's a good question. I'm not sure if Trump has changed it or if the 24/7 news cycle has changed it, or if the ability of people to reach the public outside of traditional media has changed it. You mentioned TikTok, and I think that a lot of media outlets, especially print ones, need to catch up on being where people are instead of waiting for people to come to them. I think the political candidates really got ahead of us there. They know how to be where people are now in a way that the media still hasn't quite cottoned on to. But I think that there's always been an element of the immediate start to the season after midterms. Trump's been fundraising all along. There was something recently about how with Herschel Walker's candidacy in Georgia that a percentage of whatever they were fundraising was going to Walker and the bulk of it was going to Trump. And it wasn't just going to Trump for, for fun. So I think that people have felt that he's been campaigning all along. And so this announcement just seemed inevitable in a lot of ways. That said, just because the candidates have started campaigning doesn't mean the media has to start covering everything with the same intensity as they do a political campaign. We're not yet at the crazy clown car section of the campaign when you've got 40 different candidates and half of them haven't dropped out yet. And you're just trying to keep track of it all. And I think that Trump's counting on that. Right now, there is one, and it's him. And I think there's probably some surprise among people who admire him that he's not getting the attention that he feels he deserves. It's very telling that the network that his spokesperson was on is a fringe network for people who already wouldn't be watching the mainstream media, and they had to tell their viewers that the mainstream media wasn't covering it. Otherwise, their viewers wouldn't have known.
Well, it makes me long for the days of Pat Paulson. All right, you two, thanks for joining me so much. Lylah Alphonse and Tom Fiedler, we appreciate your input. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.